Okay.
And people are going to join. So welcome to the New York Information Security Meetup / the Cyber Guild. I would like to introduce Betsy Bevilacqua, right? Did I
Yes.
pronounce it correct? Okay,
Yep, you did.
perfect. First try. We've met physically met at one of the New York City events, pre-COVID.
Mm-hmm.
And where you were part of a security forum. I think we did panel discussion. It was with
Yeah.
David
With David
Spark.
Spark. Yeah.
Yes, that was great. I always love to co-host these events, and it was well received, and I think we had full house at the time.
We
It was
did.
the Marquee in New York City. So first of all, thank you very much for taking the time. We'll spend about 35 minutes to 40 minutes and just discussing everything from your background to current events to your worldview on some cybersecurity events. You have, unbelievable background, and you are working in some exciting new things right now. So I would love to maybe just step back and say, hey, how did you get into cybersecurity? And then maybe kind of like walk us through like from the beginning. That'd be great.
Yeah. And again, thank you for inviting me. This is my first official Fireside chat, so I'm happy to be here and happy to share my story to the extent it will be helpful to somebody out there. So I got into security probably a little bit by accident. I was in college at Buffalo, New York, and I was trying to figure out what to do as a undergrad. And rather than take the CS route, I went through the IS route, which is information systems, mostly because it seemed to fit my profile at the time, where I wanted to learn a little bit about business and learn a little bit about information systems in general and how those two worlds melt together. And in one of the courses there, I met a professor who was working part-time with the FBI on, I think at the time it was bank fraud. And the stories that she brought back were just, unbelievable. And so I struck up a relationship with her, find out that she was writing a book on this thing called cybersecurity. And I said, how can I help? Because I think what you're doing is very cool. And I just want to be a part of this world. And at the time, there was a few other students who were much like me, trying to figure things out. And we just started working and researching some of the topics on the book. And, fast forward, graduated, but at the time, this is pre-AWS, so we're going way back. There was not a lot of people looking for security professionals. And so my first few jobs, I couldn't even get into the field. It took me a while, but finally I was able to land a gig working at a university on incident response, which, when you think about, this was when universities were first starting to allow students to bring in their own personal computers. And AOL was the big SMS application and an open network. So I saw all manner of threats, with the AOL worms and what have you. I got a really first line view on what an unsecured network could potentially be. But obviously we worked really hard with the team to make it make the network safe for our students. So yeah, that's the story.
Really interesting. It's I find it typical with people just kind of stumbling, especially in the early days where cybersecurity wasn't that popular. Do you find that it was great to have help along the way, or what do you find are the qualities that are required for somebody to get into the space? That you obviously have, and what would you recommend for someone who's just starting out, trying to get into the space, or maybe is doing something else right now? Maybe IT, but not necessarily IT security and so on. What would you recommend?
Yeah, and sorry, I just had to fiddle with my machine here because it was going to sleep. um, yeah, so what would I recommend? Along the way, I can't say that I wasn't very strategic about where I wanted to go or what I wanted to do, which maybe has its pluses and minuses. But for somebody coming into the field today or wanting to switch careers, I think there's a lot more support in the sense of I found that cybersecurity professionals are very generous with their time, very generous with their knowledge. Today, there's a number of courses that you can get for free, and even just communities, like Women in Cybersecurity, for instance, WISES, which is one of my favorites. Um, if you go on LinkedIn, there's communities where people are providing advice for free. In the old days, we would have to actually, hit the ground, find people in the organization. So, for instance, with me, I think I got very lucky with my coworkers. I learned how to implement firewalls through an apprenticeship. Literally, I was assigned to this team. I was a security analyst, and it was we're gonna learn today about Checkpoint, right? And just having that sort of support from people who had been in the field for a long time, but were wanting to make sure that the next generation, if you would, also had the same access to learning about these products was really key. So, in short, today, there's no shortage of information that's available for somebody who's wanting to move into the space.
Yeah, and I think looking at your career, you spent some time at Facebook and eBay, some big names, right? So,
Mm-hmm.
and then you decided to venture into and those were it looked like you spent some time on the West Coast, right? And then
Yeah.
you came back, and then you decided to join like smaller companies with a kind of maybe very senior role. Do you prefer to work in a smaller company, or maybe you kind of got your wings working for some very large organizations, and then after that you come in and into a senior role in a smaller business?
Yeah, I think working at companies, large companies such as eBay and Facebook that see a variety of threats, and that also at the same time have to balance a very fast-moving engineering culture. Um, that is quite an interesting set of challenges because you almost want, when you're in that kind of space, you almost want to say, hey, everybody, slow down. We're going to take the traditional mode here and do a threat assessment. And then maybe we'll decide if you can deploy your app or your feature into production safely. But that kind of thinking or way of working doesn't really scale when you're in a global organization with billions. In the case of Facebook, it was 2 billion users by the time I had left. You have to think about doing security in a very different way, which is mostly around influencing the rest of the employees and building a security conscious culture. So after spending about 8 years in the Bay Area, it was time to come back east. We have family here, and I also have a young family, and I wanted them to be close to their family members. And I started thinking, well, what do I want to do with my career next? I've got all this amazing experience. I've learned from some of the masters and mistresses of security. Had a chance to do some really cool stuff. And I thought, well, there's smaller companies who may not have access to this kind of security talent from the people that I learned from. And how can I do my part to build out or to ensure that we're building an ecosystem that is secure? Because you can't have all the resources go to the larger organizations, because they have the checkbooks, they have the reach, they can hire whomever they want to. But when it comes to the small to medium, and especially at the startup, this was just an amazing opportunity to be able to build security almost from the ground up, and then leave your mark on it. Oftentimes there's probably people watching today, you get into an organization, and you're sitting there scratching your head about some changes or whether it was some deployments, and going, how could somebody do this? So here's a chance when you go to a smaller company to say, I've seen it done the wrong way and I've seen it done the right way, and we're going to do the right way for our company.
And obviously, in a smaller company, you have more of an influence, to have it your way, right? You were playing senior roles of a CISO in organizations, smaller organizations. So when you come into a startup, typically startups are not known for their, for their security stance, and it's almost depending on what kind of startup that is, it's almost an afterthought. What is like the first thing you do in the first 90 days you get into a role, and you are entering a company that maybe security is not their focus, and now you have to make sure that everything is corrected to what you would like to be. So what kind of that process looks like for you?
Yeah, that's a good question. So most startups, depending on what stage they are, they're probably fighting for their business survival. And so the risk that they're concerned about is, am I going to hit payroll next week? Versus, oh, there might be a nation state attack, in our AWS instances. And so the first thing is, at least, and this is my second startup, I take a lot of time learning the organization, learning the business, learning how decisions get made, because depending on the culture, you may or may not be able to get your changes or meet your goals in the time frame that you think you're doing. And oftentimes, however long you think it's going to take you to deploy something, you need to just double that. Because when you're dealing with startups, it can feel like you're working in a different company every 3 months, right? Because either if they're growing, which hopefully that they are, their problems are growing with their user base. Their problems are growing if they're looking to expand globally. So the scope increases. So you almost have to think, okay, what are the immediate things that I can do that would be quick wins to help you get, or I'm going to use the term, your political capital. How do you gain trust of your coworkers, of your peers? Because at some point you're going to ask them to do some really hard things. And when you're doing that, you better have some wins under your belt. Otherwise, you're not going to get anywhere.
It's very interesting, because that's something that I've heard in the past, that small wins are the best. That way you can kind of assure that the people are going to basically join you in the effort of securing the organization. So do you have to do you participate in the board meetings as well, in front of the investors and so on? Is that also part of your role? Do board members, specifically for smaller companies, care about security as much as larger ones? What's your experience has been like?
Yeah, so my experience has been varied. So it depends on the industry that the startup is located in. If you are in a highly regulated industry, then yes, of course, they're concerned about mostly about the impact of regulation on their business. Because again, at this point, it's about the survival of the business. And once you start getting to a point where you've taken in a lot of venture capital, a lot of your concerns, at least a lot of the board's concerns, are around profitability. Whether the business will actually, now we're going through, this COVID and trying to figure out what this new normal would look like. Those are the questions that they're concerned about. But again, we can't, or I think now I'm starting to see a little bit change, that security is becoming a common topic within boardrooms and even within startups, because it feels, at some point there was a change, where security folks, we had a hard time, we're in the corner going, hey, we're an issue. But now when you look at the top threats for enterprises or for companies today, cybersecurity tends to be amongst the top 5. So something has changed over the past few years. I'm not sure what it is, but I'm certainly happy that it's happening.
Yeah, and I also think that startups, specifically startups, are not going to be able to recover from a potential breach, because of they're very vulnerable. As you mentioned, they're looking to make payroll, and the cost associated with a breach is paramount, such that potentially they're not going to be able to survive. With that said, how do you, how do you plan for like the next 12, 18 months? I mean, startups move so quickly. Do
Yeah,
you, in obviously the emphasis is on growth, right? Getting
yeah,
customers. So how do you then, with that high speed pursuit of, grabbing market share, maybe raising another round? I mean, that's where the focus is, right? Grabbing more customers, getting
yeah.
revenue, hitting the quarter numbers. How do you make sure that the security does not fall through the cracks? And it's still an emphasis, and then you still have that kind of roadmap in terms of what the organization look like from a security standpoint in the next 12 to 18 months.
Yeah, so I'll start with the how do you make sure security is relevant? And this is, I like to say this is where security meets marketing, because you almost have to build your own internal marketing campaign to make sure that people don't forget about you. Don't forget about the fact that even as a business is growing, even as we're raising more capital, that this is actually the time that attackers start to, take note of who you are, right? If you're hitting the news, the threats aren't reducing; they're actually increasing. And
Mm-hmm.
so, for instance, what we've built or I've built in the past are programs that are almost very related to like a drip program, where you have your initial security awareness education and training that is just required because of compliance, right? So you, depending on whatever industry you're in or whatever regulations you have to comply with, security is might be a piece of that component. So get that stuff out of the way, but then start focusing on the fun stuff. And by the fun stuff, I mean, when I was at Facebook, we had something called Hacktober. So every October, we had this giant campaign where we would, the security team would hack the entire company. And what I mean by that is we had a series of phishing campaigns. We had CTFs. We would sponsor. I'm struggling to say. There's some things I can't say, but we had contests where, for instance, we would go hunt for secrets, and all of this is really driven to remind people that no matter how good things look or how things are going, that there's always that underlying threat that what you've built that could be attacked, and all the good times could really come crashing down when you're not vigilant. So these are the messages that we would pass around. We had lock picking contests, and the idea was, even though you think, and I'm talking to a group of security folks, but the idea for people who are not in security is that, yeah, you might have a lock, but it's very easy to bypass with a set of tools. So start thinking with the attacker mindset. And this was really, it really resonated with a lot of our engineering teams, right? Because this is where the hardware meets security theory.
It almost sounds like fun.
Well, it's the whole point.
Gamification, right? Gamification
Yep.
of okay, well, I mean, that's probably like one of the best advices out there for folks within security, to see how they can gamify and make sure that include. I think inclusion is another thing, right? How do you include people that are outside of the IT security area and have them feel like they're taking part? So what's your role today? You're part of Chainalysis, right?
Yes.
Chainalysis. Yeah.
Chainalysis. Yeah.
Chainalysis. Okay. And
Yeah. So sorry, go
yeah,
ahead.
no, and maybe you can kind of touch. I mean, the industry, specifically the blockchain industry, is super interesting, and you obviously know a lot about it. So maybe we can kind of dive a little deeper into what the company does. That'd be great. Whatever you can divulge, obviously.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so Chainalysis is a blockchain security company. So at a high level, what we do is we provide transparency about what is happening on the blockchain. And this is the problem that we're solving is for financial institutions. So as part of anti-money laundering controls, we can then identify real-world entities and match them to transactions that are happening on the blockchain. So what I mean by entities, I mean whether it's a cryptocurrency business, or it could be a dark market, it could be a mixer. Our software allows, whether it's financial institutions or cryptocurrency businesses, to engage, or their customers to engage in crypto with confidence. And we've seen quite a number of changes happening on the regulatory side. You know, I was mentioning earlier before we started the call that we're at this point in our history where there's been quite a number of technology changes, even just over the past 10 years. And crypto is on that path. And I'm not just at this point talking about cryptocurrency, but even just the whole world of blockchain and what we potentially could build on top of that infrastructure. So it's a really exciting space to be in. And you know, the goal of Chainalysis is to make sure that when, at least for now, when people are interacting with cryptocurrencies, that they can do so confidently and securely.
So I thought it was anonymous. I thought part of the blockchain is not knowing, or basically providing the access to only by choice. So, you know, maybe I'm not understanding correctly, but you know, how is that visibility and control relates to the fact that supposedly some of the blockchains are anonymous? Or do you overcome that? Is that part of what you do as a company?
So what we do is that maybe it might be it might make more sense if I give you an example of how some of our products are used. So today we've got a product called KYT, which is Know Your Transaction. Mm-hmm. And so our customers who may be cryptocurrency exchanges, they are required to, by law, have anti-money laundering controls. And so what happens is they will partner with a company like Chainalysis, and they will provide us with their pseudonymized transaction. So we don't know, you know, whose account this is. We just have a pseudonymized list of transactions. And then what we do is provide visibility, and by mapping those transactions and, you know, mapping the flow of funds to say, this came from, you know, your crypto exchange, and then, you know, flowed through this mixer or this coin join, and then ended up in a sanctioned wallet address. So we're tracking wallet addresses and tracking them to entities. Mm-hmm. And then from there, a crypto exchange can determine how much of their transactions are flowing to risky or high risk services.
You know, so yeah, it makes total sense. So, you know, so it's really interesting because it's basically a new area within security, right? You know, if you told somebody like 5 years ago that you were going to be doing blockchain security, right? They would have been like, oh, what is that? Right? So this is what I like specifically about this whole industry, is that there are so many domains. And I think we're just like there is, you know, vehicle security, autonomous vehicle security. There's a lot of areas of security that continuously develop, and you know, it opens up the doors to additional areas of security. You know, like I'm assuming, for example, it's going to be like, you know, IoT wearables, right? So I'm assuming that eventually there's going to be a company out there who's going to develop security controls around some of these wearables. So the area is really advancing. So what is the most, and this is kind of outside the realm of security, but I mean, the whole industry is really developing. What have you seen like the most, you know, current business function for blockchain today? Is there any commercial applications that use this technology today?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I like to think about, well, actually, let me take a step back. When I first joined Chainalysis, I had a hard time describing what I did to my family, right? And so I made it my mission, and I talked to a lot of my coworkers, and I said, you know, what is it about, how do you describe what you do every day to people who don't live in this world, this crypto world? And I think one of the best descriptions came from one of my coworkers whose daughter, he overheard his daughter telling her friend that my dad works with invisible money. So I took that and I said, well, okay, I think for a lot of people, cryptocurrency is still a mystery. A lot of the stories we hear about cryptocurrency may tend to get on the negative side, saying, well, it's just for illicit activities, for buying drugs. But this is where a company like Chainalysis comes in, which is when we provide transparency about what is happening on the blockchain, we actually understand that it's not just illicit. Yes, of course, there's the illicit use, and that's what we're aiming to address. But there's a number of very legitimate applications for cryptocurrency. It's now becoming almost like like gold, where it's a store of value. But beside that, so going back to your question about what other applications could come on top of that, at this point, another description of the blockchain itself that I found to be useful, that would help answer this question, is think of it as a giant, another giant cloud. And if you had told me, I don't know, 20 years ago that we would be moving data centers to the cloud, basically somebody else's infrastructure, a lot of security people would just have shook their heads, because it might be hard to believe, but back then, I remember being very skeptical that this would happen. So I think crypto is at that, or blockchain is at that space today, where cryptocurrencies are just the very first and real application that a lot of people have heard about. But on top of that, there's probably a number of applications that we just have not seen. It could be that there are people working on that today and we're just not aware. But I think the last application that I saw that I thought was really interesting was built on the Ethereum network, where there was an experiment. I think it was either Colombia or somewhere in South America, where they were attempting to build out transparency in their procurement process, right? So when you start thinking about those kinds of applications and what the ramifications are, if I can track the source of funds flowing from my government, then that holds my government accountable. And as a citizen, I want that kind of transparency. So it's a different question whether the governments are ready to invite that sort of scrutiny, but that's certainly one interesting application. And I'm sure there's a few others that are being built on that Ethereum infrastructure that we just haven't heard of yet. But I think the potential is there. There might be people on the call today working on something that the next 5 years we're going to be talking about as if it was an everyday thing. But sitting in our seats where we are today, it looks almost impossible.
I do think we're turning a corner a little bit. It seems like we're, at least cryptocurrency is more on the news than it was at least a year ago, even 6 months ago. And maybe even the financial crisis that's happening now, and COVID-19 is creating some sort of like, all this money printing, creating some sort of visibility into cryptocurrencies. So in your opinion, and you kind of alluded to like the kind of the bad rep for cryptocurrency that used to be. So what, in your opinion, needs to happen for blockchain to become, cryptocurrency to become mainstream? Just to, aside from, yeah, well, where everybody knows about it and everybody uses, I mean, there are some tools right now. You can go out and buy, using an app, you can go out. I think some places on the West Coast, right? You spend some time there, you can buy coffee. Yeah, ATMs you can buy. It's in 7-Eleven. Then they you can actually buy Bitcoin using the ATMs, right? And they only charge like 5% transaction fee.
Yeah. So the question about how can we make, or how does Bitcoin become mainstream? I think right now there's still a mystery, or it's still enshrouded, or it's still a very specific group of people who are very active in cryptocurrency. And in order for it to gain mass adoption, I think the user experiences has to get better. How we talk about cryptocurrency and whether it's tied to stable coins, like all of these I think, what we saw in 2017, 2018, when the price of Bitcoin, skyrocketed, that's when a lot of people, rushed into the field. And, I'm sure there's people who made a lot of money, but there's also people who lost a lot of money. And when you have such wild volatility, it can almost feel like, and you actually, when you apply economics to it, if you're looking at it from yes, there is scarcity because at some point, we won't have any more Bitcoins. And so we've got the scarcity piece, but we still, the whole value prop, I think there's still a lot of people who don't trust that this can be an accepted way of storing your value, right? If you can watch the value of a Bitcoin go down so fast, not everyone has a stomach for that, and neither should they, right? Especially not if they're opposite. People still like the idea of fiat money, right? I can hold $1, I can put it under my mattress, but I can't do that with Bitcoin. Just the idea of digital ownership is really interesting. And what does it mean to own something digitally? How many things do we own that are digital today? Maybe I've got some books on my phone, but can I, take them out of there? And so there's just, I think that understanding of how we address digital currency is one of the pieces in which we'll need to sort out as we get into more adoption of a cryptocurrency.
Do you find specifically due to the properties of blockchain and cryptocurrency that there are any the specific security concerns? Maybe they're heightened, for example, that kind of the one way, once you write into it, you can't reverse it. Do you find there any specific challenges that you encounter because you're dealing with something that has a very specific set of properties?
So I think, I heard about cryptocurrencies around 2011 is when I really started paying attention. And the reason I was paying attention to it is not because I wanted to go out and buy Bitcoin. It's because I was interested in what Anonymous and LulzSec, I don't know if you remember that at the time, that's when ransomware started gaining popularity, and anytime I would read about these attacks, Bitcoin would show up. And so I downloaded the white paper and started trying to understand what the proposal was. And what I found is after that, we started getting a lot of these exchanges, these crypto exchanges come up, and lots of very interesting crypto businesses. But every time I would think about, going to purchase Bitcoin, I would read about how, like for instance, the Mt. Gox hack, how people just lost their funds, seemingly with no recourse.
Mm-hmm.
And so so it's like this paradox where you might have a decentralized, or actually not decentralized, a distributed network where you've got the immutable transactions and you've got transparency. But at the same time, if it can get to a crypto exchange and then disappear, this is not something I want to be involved in. But this is where companies like Chainalysis come in, where we are helping these cryptocurrency businesses understand where funds might be going, and they can then take action, to meet their compliance obligations to protect their consumers as well. So I don't know. I feel like I sort of like, meandered my way to your.
No, I think, well, listen, some of these questions we haven't planned in advance, and you're doing great. I mean, this is not an easy topic, and hopefully the people that are on this call, understand this is fascinating. I just looked up the 2011 pricing for Bitcoin. It was around $10. You would have been independently wealthy if we would have spent, a couple $1,000s on this. It went up like by 10,000%.
If only I trusted it in 2011.
Right. Exactly. And it's really interesting. The whole space I think is growing leaps and bounds. And I think there's, people are saying, okay, if we as you mentioned, physical is still king, or I guess sometimes, but they say, well, what happened if we ran out of electricity, or we, no more, no more power? So I think you have bigger fish to fry if that happens. I don't think you would be worried about so much about the money,
No.
if that. so,
Yeah.
so, so what's in store for you? Once you're done, doing this role, if you had your dream position or dream job, what would you do? I mean, obviously you're involved in the community and you're participating in this conversation. I've seen you give a talk at CNBC, specifically about the opportunities in cybersecurity in Africa, right? And
Yeah.
the COVID-19 impact. Maybe so.
Yeah.
First of all, maybe kind of divert into that. We'll talk a bit about the COVID-19 impact on
Sure.
you personally and the industry as a whole, and then where you see the opportunities are specifically in the space.
Yeah. So just for the folks on the call, I'm originally from Nairobi, Kenya, and as an immigrant, I feel, and I've heard other immigrants share this, where you almost feel like your heart is split in two sometimes, where you remember your childhood and where you grew up, and you're also then an adult in a completely different environment, but there's still that pull. So for me, there's a lady by the name of Wendy Nather. I think she's at Duo, and she gave a talk, or I forget how I came across this line, but she called it the cybersecurity poverty line. There might be people who've heard about this. And this really struck me because it's, we're in security. We keep talking about the shortage of cybersecurity professionals. We talk about just where we're going in the future with big data, social, mobile, cloud. And where does this leave companies that are, in the small to medium or even nonprofit that cannot afford to have a cybersecurity program? Where does this leave companies in the developing world that may not have the same access to cybersecurity professionals or tools? Yes, there's a lot on open source right now, but unless you have the staff with the software engineering skills, it can be really hard to take advantage of those. So, these are issues that have been core to me, and just something that I want to make a dent in or have an impact in as much as I can. So a number of friends and I, 2 years ago, we formed a startup, and we are an analytics company. But I know security, and the people I'm working with know security. And so we focused on, why don't we build something to provide cybersecurity monitoring for the underserved market? And those underserved markets could be in East Africa, which is where one part of our operations is, but also here in the U.S. We're working with smaller companies and utilities, municipalities in the rural parts of America, where they may also not have the same budgets, and their concerns are fairly justified, especially when we look at critical infrastructure and where we're going with OT, or operational technology. So there's a lot of impact to be had in areas that don't necessarily have the concentration of security talent, or the big checkbook to buy all the amazing security tools.
That's really interesting. So the poverty line, the cybersecurity poverty line, in the these SMBs, or they have quite similar needs, right? In terms of security, they just don't have the people power. So do you find, and this is obviously a gap, do you find that we are able to fill that gap using potentially automation, machine learning, some of the other areas where you can automate? I mean, that's the reason, why they're in the poverty line, is because they can't afford to hire a team of security professionals, right? They just don't have the capacity. So do you think that, technology is catching up to that, to be able to provide some of that in automated fashion?
Yeah, so I think one of the reasons that we have operations in East Africa, specifically in Kigali, Rwanda, is because we are co-located with Carnegie Mellon, and Carnegie Mellon, folks might know, have a campus in Kigali. They basically have the same degree programs as they do here in Pittsburgh, and they have those offered in Kigali. And what we found was there was a large concentration of machine learning, deep learning, data science-y types of folks with that background, which matches very well with cybersecurity. Because at the end of the day, when you're looking at incident response, the problem you're trying to solve is, how can I make sense of all of this information that I'm pulling from all of my systems to build some actionable information. And that is a problem that deep learning, machine learning, and at some point AI will help to address. So absolutely, we don't need more people. We need more machines to learn.
So what about the shortage in cybersecurity professionals? Do you feel that this is a real shortage, or just companies are not willing to pay? Especially like, for example, areas like New York City, right, where it's just a costly place to live, right? So paying someone six-figure salary, low six figures is not really high salary, because they have to pay so much for rent and living expenses. So do you feel that that gap is a real gap, but it needs to be fulfilled, or is this just due to the fact that just companies don't they can't afford to pay these security professionals?
I think it's two things. One is, there definitely is a gap, because we're not just talking about New York City, we're talking about a global shortage. I forget what the latest number is, but a few years ago, it was 1.5 million by 2020. I don't know if we've reached that. I don't know if anybody ever goes back to see if the predictions were accurate. But the reason I say that is because even as we're hiring, I'm growing a team. There's definitely a shortage, in the sense that sometimes we might be looking for people with specific skills, and those are hard to come by. And so part of it is, we can change the tactic for how we are recruiting, and say, maybe you don't have all these 10 things, but you've got 3 and you're willing to learn to pick up the other 5, and make it whole, then yes. So I think it's a little bit of both, where there still is a shortage. Part of some of the challenges we're dealing with today are just new. And if you did not grow up in the cloud, it can be a little bit of a curve to try and catch up. But, on the other hand, there are tools, but you also need to have people who are willing to step out of their comfort zone, and then make use of these tools that can probably help make our lives easier over time.
COVID-19, right? So we talked a bit about that. What was your personal impact on you, maybe in kind of part ways, in a positive note, things that this whole pandemic was, causing, maybe a benefit to you and your business and so on?
Yeah.
If there isn't any, then you can share that as well. You just never know.
Let me make sure I understand. Are you asking about a positive impact on me and my personal, or okay?
Personal and business. I don't know if the way you interact with colleagues, people from industry, just in general. I'll give you an example. So the medical community, for example, does a phenomenal job, collaborating, since the pandemic hit. So worldwide, they are going after, trying to find. So I'm looking to see if there's any areas within our space, our industry, where it created some positive impact, in the way we communicate, maybe potentially the way we interact, and so on.
I gotcha. Well, I think one thing that COVID-19 brought to our attention, and this is, I'm just speaking industry-wide, and I'll come back to me and to my company. But the uptick in cybercrime was just phenomenal, right? It was never waste a crisis, and we saw everything from the World Health Organization getting impersonated, We saw people building rogue maps for tracking COVID-19. But all of this led to, I would say, maybe a bigger awareness. Because for me personally, at Chainalysis, I took that opportunity to say, here's, to ramp up my security awareness efforts, where we said, there's probably a number of things we could be doing better now that we're working from home. And one of the things that I forget where I saw this, but this idea of being politely paranoid, right? There's people trying to attack us saying, install this VPN client. And we saw all this stuff. We saw all this stuff hitting our employees. And what that generated that made me happy is that people started getting paranoid and asking tough questions. And we use Slack like most startups, and we have a security channel. And the number of questions that were coming into that security channel were just amazing to see. So on the one hand, yes, the cyber criminals, took advantage and, ramped up their efforts, and they actually just used the same old trick out of their bags. Right? They didn't even innovate. They didn't have to innovate. Maybe they opted not to. It's cheaper not to, and just use the same old tricks. But at the same time, the response internally that I saw was great. And then outside of the security realm, I think you asked about personal. I realized how much I craved routine in my life. I work in New York City, and I had my quiet time in the morning, and as I was commuting, but all of that just went out the window. And what I learned was I need to do a better job of getting the balance right and building those artificial barriers, because it's very possible to start your day and and get lost in your work. And if you don't have those cues to tell you, okay, it's time. In my situation, I have 2 young children, and so they will normally be the physical cue when they walk into my meetings. They know all my coworkers now. It's hilarious. But I can see that if you didn't have that, then it can be very easy to get lost in your work and forget about all the other things that you need to function as a human, whether it's your podcast in the morning or your coffee. There's a food truck that I would go to every morning and get my coffee from, and all of that, all those routines are now gone. But hopefully, reopening will bring. Obviously, everyone's being very cautious about it, but I'm still optimistic that we're going to go back. It might not be the same. It probably won't be the same, but we'll get back.
I hope so too. I hope that next time maybe we'll do this event, physically in New York City, and then go for a beer afterwards with the community. Where can people find you if they want to reach out, say hi?
Yeah. I would love that. So I'm mostly on LinkedIn. I don't go on Twitter much, but you can find me on LinkedIn.
Okay, fantastic. So thank you very much, Betsy, for joining and doing this session. We've learned a lot. I specifically learned a lot about blockchain and the security areas, and as well as your your contribution specifically to cybersecurity within the startup community. I think that's very honorable that you decided to take on that role of securing startups. It's not easy. And there's some major challenges there, but you're obviously doing a great job. So thank you very much again. And then again, looking forward to seeing you hopefully in in New York City sometime soon. Everything else is over. Thank you all for joining, and looking forward to seeing you in next couple of days for the next event, next virtual session.
Thanks, everyone. Take care.
Thank you, Betsy. Take care.